Thank you for the organising committee for inviting me. It's amazing to see students, huge amount of international students all over the world. The organising committee, I think it's all women, and this is fantastic to see, organising the 15th year of this conference. As Georgia has already said, it's fantastic to come back. I was in Leeds in the sociology department for 13 years. And it's got a very strong and permanent place in my heart, the University of Leeds. So it's really great to come back and to see how support for the research environment for postgraduate students has really just gone from strength to strength. And it's wonderful to see as well with colleagues from York as well, building on those collaborations. So we've got people presenting from York as well, I think, today. So it's fantastic to see that, and I'm really pleased to be here. Let's see. My slides work. Not moving. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So what just happened? So today's talk is really going to reflect some of this overwhelming and confusing context that we've been in for well over a year now, and we're starting to come out of the fog in some parts of the world, not all, and people certainly on this call will have resonance with that in relation to you know, each country, each region in the world are at different stages with this, and we're certainly not out of the woods entirely. Vaccinations are clearly being rolled out at different speeds, but we're really hoping that we are coming out of the fog, and certainly in the UK context in which you're studying, we're kind of getting to a post-lockdown stage. But we've all come to this, and we've all got different experiences of what's just happened, really, which to reflect on some of these roles. You know, we all have different roles when we're students. We also may be doing teacher roles, we may be doing researcher roles. We've got complex roles engaging in postgraduate research anyway. I think what's just happened really has exacerbated how many different roles and hats and commitments that we probably have. We may also have professional responsibilities engaging in educational settings or other types of paid employment. And of course, caring responsibilities, and we know there's a gender discrepancy that's happened there in the last year. We've obviously had our own health concerns and much more at the forefront of what we possibly normally would have done, and certainly caretaking, and whether that's ourselves or people around us, our family, our friends, and that's often something that hasn't normally been part of how we understand our education to be. So this year has certainly been a bit of a realignment around care and how care fits in with our studies and our jobs as researchers. We've had so much to navigate. The restrictions, the mobility restrictions, the government restrictions that have been imposed on us, navigating self-isolation and those kind of rules. We're now going into a period where we have to navigate travel restrictions further, and the restrictions around travel will be very at the forefront of lots of people on this call. You know, when can you go home? When can you see family and friends? You know, these things are ongoing and are likely to carry on for the foreseeable. And then, you know, as you all start to get into those age groups of vaccinations, there's another set of things to think about and to navigate and to take care of. We know that generally in any one institution, international students are around 40% in postgraduate. So, you know, we're talking here, and this call is real testament, people all over the world, that international students have a discrete and distinct set of different experiences and different needs. And I really hope the University of Leeds are thinking about that and making the provisions there for students online who may have gone home or maybe in a different situation. So all these things that are on this slide today, you know, it is a fog still, and we're all at different points of that fog. Some people are really still in it or trying to come out of it. Some people are a bit further down the road. But essentially the background of the talk today is what we're looking at here. And it just myriads our different experiences that we bring to being a student and being a researcher. So how do we navigate it? So we have been navigating it. And I said in my abstract, if you're here today, you've done pretty well. You've navigated through the most bizarre and strange and difficult time across the globe. And in the UK, we certainly have had those very strict restrictions. You have navigated it pretty well. You're here, you're engaging, you're being part of a community, albeit online. And you have many strategies and skills to do that already. It may not seem that sometimes. Often we've had feelings of being overwhelmed or not knowing how to navigate. But the fact that you're here today and engaging with this conference really does show that you have been fairly successful in getting to this point. So well done for being here. But I think we all have to take stock in different ways. We all have to take stock of what's happened and how the pandemic has really changed either us individually or our circumstances or our research. We certainly have to take stock of our workflow and our productivity. How has that been affected? We've all been affected in different ways. Hopefully you've had lots of support from your supervisors, maybe even from your funders. I know certainly in the UK, the UKRI certainly started to try to look at postgraduate funding and making sure there's extensions, either certainly time-wise, but if not financially. And from your institution, hopefully the University of Leeds has really been at the forefront of thinking how to support students. But this is ongoing, okay, and normality is still quite far away. Having this conference in the physical realm, in a nice room in the University of Leeds, having a nice lunch, does still feel like quite a long way away. There is still confusion about what's going to happen in September. Are we going to be back face to face? Are you going to have supervisions face to face? Is a campus going to operate like we would normally think? All those things are still quite up in the air, and rightly so, because we're not sure what's going to happen over the summer. But there is those broader issues that we have to think about around motivation and momentum. And this is on top of already something like a PhD or postgraduate studies being very difficult anyway. It's an autonomous, individual piece of work. And momentum and motivation can always be an issue or something that needs to be looked at and caretaked in that sense. But given the context that we've been in, this is certainly something at the forefront of everyone's minds. And I think for researchers in any context, momentum has certainly been something that has been hindered because of the situation. The ethics of our research has changed, and I'll talk about a little bit about that later. But I know personally from some of the projects that I've been doing, it's felt highly inappropriate to do research over the last year, when people are struggling to survive their jobs, their children at home, different contexts of illness or what's the word, shielding. It felt quite intrusive to do research and inappropriate in some senses to ask people when they're trying to struggle to put food on the table, to ask them for research interviews, to ask them to comment on their own lives when they're dealing with huge amounts of stress. So this may be some of your experiences as well, in terms of how the general context has affected not only you, but your research participants. And that may ultimately have slowed down your research, or you've had to think through quite differently how you do your research. Certain methodologies have been affected more than others. So I'm generally would do ethnographic research in informal and illegal economies, such as the sex industry. And obviously that's been really difficult over the last year because it generally has been closed down. So we've had to think through our methodologies often as we think what we've been doing in the last year. Should we change our research questions as well? Have we had to think about our research questions? And should all of our research questions be dominated by COVID? You can just see the academic literature already being very dominated about coping with COVID, post-pandemic world. And of course, these are really, really important questions, but I'm starting to think, does this obscure other elements of our questioning around the social world or whatever our disciplines are bringing us to? And should we look at everything in a COVID lens? Question mark. So we've had to make a lot of changes. Hopefully you've got some clarity now about how your PhD, your work has been changed. That hopefully you've got some sense of being back on track. It might be a different track to what you originally started on, but hopefully by now, given a year of disruption, there is some light at the end of the tunnel around regaining your research focus, even if it is slightly different. Don't worry, I think the navigation part of it, you're not alone. All researchers on all projects have had to either suspend or change what they're doing quite dramatically, or just pause it for some time. In my day job, I'm the Director of Research in the School of Criminology at Leicester. And much of my job has really been about supporting colleagues to suspend their research, rethink how they're going to do their research, reapply for ethics for different methodologies. And it's only now really that we're starting to come out of that and have the green light to go ahead and do some kind of field work. Obviously, travel's only just been allowed in the UK. So you're not alone. PhD students are certainly not alone. They're certainly part of this process of thinking through change and how we can learn from the pandemic and move on and still produce excellent research. I think one of the key things to say then really is, how can we learn from the pandemic? And hopefully you've already started to think and reflect on your own learning and share that as a community. I think some of the things, there are opportunities that the pandemic has created. One of the things is around the value of face-to-face meetings. And I think some other colleagues on this might be chuckling at the thought of all those meetings that we were dragged into, the face-to-face meetings, and what is their use and what is their value. I think many people have been very productive doing online meetings like this, connecting the world, making the world smaller, using technology to bring people together in ways that we didn't do before. And it seems very strange now looking back. Why didn't we have these online conferences? Why didn't we have these online meetings? Why didn't we connect with people all over the world in this very simple, light touch and resourceful way? I do a lot of training with the police in my day job. Trying to get a whole load of police together in a room probably happens once or twice a year, really. Over the pandemic, I've been able to train police every 2 weeks from all over the country. So it just goes to show that we've been forced into these situations where we have to think about the value of face-to-face meetings. But I think hopefully we'll carry on thinking about the use of face-to-face and the physical. And when and how is it appropriate to swap that? I don't think anyone is going to rush back to doing how we operated before. So it's trying to take some of the good, really, but still making sure we've got that community. And today, I think it's testament that online can still bring a community together. In all of this, we have to think about our digital well-being. I'm sure everyone's had huge headaches, literally physical headaches from being on Zoom too much. Screen blurring, eyes blurring, fatigue. In the beginning, I remember last March, April, thinking, how can just sitting looking at a screen for 7 hours, how can it be so exhausting? But hopefully we started to manage our digital well-being a little bit more and take a bit of a break from that and think about our working relationships online. So often we kind of miss those corridor chats, those cafe chats, those nipping for lunch, and trying to replicate that online has sometimes been a little bit difficult. But I think we've all started to think about how we can develop and keep and enhance our working relationships online. I think sometimes it's easier to maintain relationships you've already got rather than start new ones online. So that's a little bit to think about in relation to when we do need to have that face-to-face. And sometimes it's harder to make new collaborations and partnerships just from being online. So it's thinking through what we need to do in the future. But communication, I think, has been key. And I think lots of people have learned to be more communicative, be more part of communities, make those spaces like today, fantastic space for people to come together, and be a bit more innovative about how they use online spaces. Obviously, Zoom's just one of the many ways, but we use Teams at Leicester, and it's a great place for all our documents and all our meetings and all our chats, and to really have that sense of online space and a place to go to just kind of put in a big call. But the really interesting things I've really found about Zoom, and I would normally bring in one of my props at this point in time. So I've got pet chickens, or I had pet chickens until last week, and the fox killed them all. So I was planning to bring my chickens to show you. I know, don't be too traumatized. It's a terrible thing, but it does happen quite often. So we've seen people's pets, we've seen people's parents, we've seen amazing wallpapers And in my case, I made my partner give me some new wallpaper just because I hated looking at a grey screen. I wanted parrots and dongles, and we've been in people's homes, in people's spaces. So we've had to really get into how we communicate, but also be careful not to be too zoomed out and not to have techno fatigue. And I hope you're all taking care of that. But I think we do still come to the point where we do love a coffee shop and we do love to work. All my PhD students, they're all in coffee shops working. And I kind of get it. I get the way the community, you know, is such a, can be such an isolating experience doing a PhD. So I totally get the coffee shop as a space to do some work. And I think we will all be looking forward to getting back to that. But hopefully these spaces can really be that virtual coffee shop in some ways, and just keep us connected. But yeah, I'm sure we can't wait somehow to get back. So I just want to really make the point here about trying to learn from the pandemic, trying to keep a check of how we've had to change, but not losing sight of the fact that we need to do excellent, robust and ethical research. And this is something that the University of Leeds really does pride itself on, and supervisors there really are signing up to. But we do have to ask, I know Dr. Richard Smith later today will be talking through some of the practical challenges, how we overcome these and how we look at the opportunities. But we still need to think about how we've reorganised our research, how we've rescheduled, how we've paused our activities. And maybe we've had to do that really quite harsh approach to our research by really changing our core research questions. I don't know if anyone on the call, you can tell me later, if you've had to really do a massive rethink, or if you had to scale down your research, you've had to go for alternative methods, you've had to think through a different type of approach to your research area, or completely change entirely. So I'd really like to hear from people in the questions, whether this has happened to you, and the process that you went to now to land up at a different type of research, and whether that has enhanced or you're feeling like you're shortchanging yourself in your research area. But I think it's really important not to rush this, and there is lots of ways that the institution can support you with leave of absence for the study, or extensions, or thinking through the way the institution and the PhD process, the administrative side, can support you in this. And hopefully you've all had those conversations several times with your supervisors. But don't rush. This is your one chance to do an amazing piece of work if you're doing a PhD. Don't rush it. It's probably will be the biggest and the most detailed piece of work you'll ever do. So please don't rush it, and please don't feel that you should rush it, or you should fall down on the option that seems the easiest straight away, because things are changing all the time. And also making decisions doesn't always has other consequences, and you could fall into methodological potholes, I like to say. Something looks like it's the solution, but it's full of potholes, and it's actually probably more trouble than the original plan. So you can start to create ethical minefields if you don't really take the time and really think through with your peers, with your supervisors, what is the best way forward. So yeah, lots of people have obviously gone to do online research and have switched ultimately to interviews online. But these can cause lots of other ethical issues, and certainly issues around data management and data storage, and who's filming and where's it going to be stored, and the consent issues and process for participants. So we have to think around these solutions, and technology is obviously helping us to do that. But we also need to think about, as the easing up comes, social distancing starts to change, the ability to travel, etc. Can we do hybrid methodologies and go back to some of our original plans going forward? So research experiences are obviously going to happen because of the pandemic, and you will be dealing with some disappointments, no doubt. Again, I'd really like to hear about the disappointments. I think we need to get away from the idea that everything is going to be fine and we're all doing really well, because that's just not the case. It certainly hasn't been for my colleagues and myself, really. And some projects have really failed because of the pandemic. Others have been absolutely blooming, and I can't actually believe I did an amazing project with colleagues in Nairobi in Kenya, and collected a huge amount of data in a month, all online. So we all have got different approaches and experiences here, And I think it's important that we talk about the failures or the less successful activities, as well as the ones that are being successful. But in all of this, we do need to realise and utilise our resources, whether they're our human resources, our techno resources, our physical spaces, or our psychological strength. And we need to be led by our peers. And this is a great example of our peer-led communities. These are our barometers, and these are our mentors and confidants as we start to come out of this lockdown, and we start to think about what our research careers are going to look like. So my last slides before I really want to hear from lots of people here. Achieving the end game. Now, in say January, February 2020, I had no idea about Marvel films. Didn't know any of these people on the screen here. What's Marvel? Spider-Man? What's that? I've watched 24 Marvel films in the most recent lockdowns. Ask me any question about the Avengers, I can answer it. It was our family thing to do. We went through the whole Marvel. And I think thinking about the end game is really quite important, but it is that journey, like the Avengers, to the end game that we need to think about and we need to learn from. So you've already demonstrated your immense skills to navigate this year, as I've already said, but think about them, put them down on paper. What have you done? These are all transferable skills. These are the kind of things that will get you a job. We've all had to adapt, be flexible. Agile working is the new term, certainly at Leicester. But these are real things that will get you employed. These are transferable skills that employers want to know about, how you managed the pandemic, how you worked your research, how you got to your end game, possibly submitting that thesis, how you navigated these research environments are all really important things that you need to think as not just this crazy experience you've had. These are transferable skills that will get you the job. So the papers today, as I've looked through the booklet, they showcase, several of them are directly addressing the pandemic related implications, but they're testament to your resilience as researchers here at Leeds and York, and hopefully my Leicester students are here on the call as well. It shows that you've got flexibility and you've been supported by your supervisors to do that. So today looks like it's set to be a very positive one for people here. It's filled with reflection and positive thinking around dealing with adversity and change, and that it's both within our lives and the lives and the livelihoods of our participants that we will succeed and make great research. These are indeed the skills that researchers need going forward after their PhD. So in some ways, the pandemic has taught us agility in ways that any other formal education or supervision could not. We should look for the positives in whatever is thrown at us, and as ultimately research can only reflect the world of our participants and that which we inhabit. So I really hope you take away some good messages from that today. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hopefully look forward to some feedback.
Thank you very much, Teela. Wonderful presentation and also very reassuring, I have to say. And I'm sure everybody will have resonated with some of the things you mentioned, and sorry about the pet chickens.
Oh, I know, it's traumatizing.
Yeah, but I'm sure everybody has seen lots of pets during these months of lockdown. Now we have around 20 minutes, 15-20 minutes for questions, and I'm sure we'll have plenty. Please feel free to type them in the chat or put your hand button up if you want to ask them yourself. Parinita.
Hi, thank you so much. That was such a good talk. And yeah, like Georgia said, really reassuring to see that everyone goes through the same sort of things at whatever stage of the academic journey you're on. I was wondering if you, through your experience as a researcher yourself or working with other research students, you've had this sort of had to like learn to not be tied to this productivity guilt that, you're not working as much as you should, you're comparing yourself to others. Like, even though it's ridiculous and silly to do this, it's sometimes really difficult to unlearn things that you have living in a late capitalist society. So yeah,
Yeah.
just your experience.
Yeah, I think it's a complete myth that no one has been affected by this. I mean, obviously we know there's some gender differences here, and there's things like journals have done these audits and they know fewer women than men are putting in journal articles, and you can see how, you know, the patriarchy supports some of this in some ways, but we're hoping that things like the peer review process and institutions will think about equality, diversity, inclusion issues and going forward. And I know certainly at Leicester there's pots of money that people can apply for if they've been adversely affected by COVID, which we all have in different ways. So I think, you know, we need to look to our institutions and making sure that they're addressing these issues structurally, and, you know, making sure there are those extensions for when people need it, or things are being taken into consideration around EDI issues particularly. So yeah, I think it is a misnomer that no one's been affected and our productivity it's just different, I think. And I think it also ties into these discussions pre-pandemic about the slow academy, okay, about doing things slowly with thought. Certainly if we're doing any participation action research methodologies, about bringing our participants with us and working very closely with our participants and partners. That's obviously been massively affected in the pandemic, when people have been struggling to survive in many ways. And asking partners, NGOs for instance, or any of our partners, schools, as if any research has been taking place in schools, they're just trying to survive and get kids through an education system. So so I think we need to take it slowly. And hopefully our institutions will take care of that as well. Lots of chat. It's great to see everyone chatting. It's been great. Thank you for all your thanks, but this has been lovely. It's great to talk to people, and if I can offer any kinds of reassurance then and tips, then yeah, I mean, we're all working hard, we're all working in different ways, and just to make sure you're using the university resources as much as possible, and there's lots of people around to help students. Ultimately, I do think the well-being of students has really been prioritised in universities. So, you know, make sure you're accessing the resources and people. So
and we have
yeah. So she's asking some of the alternative methodologies that you've adopted in the pandemic. So, I mean, I'm generally a qualitative researcher and ethnography is my thing. So I've had to put the ethnography to a side. I was doing a project on brothels. In fact, it was a 20-year restudy. So I did my PhD 20 years ago, a little longer now, in brothels in a city in the UK. And I had a research fellowship to go back and do it again 20 years later, to look at continuity and change, what happened in these brothels. And I was able to speak to several people I'd interviewed 20 years ago who were still working in some capacities. And that started in September, October, before the pandemic. So I had got some 6 months of data, but then it was drastically cut short. And now several of the brothels haven't opened. So I've had to suspend the project and think about what I'm going to do now, really. It's quite... I am slightly resistant on that project, which was looking at a 20-year change, to just look at COVID now, which a lot of the noise is, or just look at how COVID has affected the brothels. Well, I'm not really that interested in that. I want to do a 20-year study, because people who worked in the brothels, the women who worked in the brothels, have got 20 years of change to talk about, not just the last 18 months. So we have to do some thinking around, is it just the COVID effects we want to talk about? So alternative methodologies, I was very lucky to get money to work with a project. I worked with an NGO in Nairobi who works with sex workers, called the Bar Hostesses Empowerment Support Project, who support 20,000 sex workers in Nairobi. And we were very quickly able to get some money in there, a team of researchers in Nairobi, including peers, to go out and assess what was happening for the sex workers, which is pretty dire and pretty horrific. But as part of that project, we were able to use WhatsApp to get people's to call people up with consent, and to get them just to talk for 3 or 4 minutes, and we'd obviously pay them. It's just a few dollars. It was the going rate there. We pay them in mobile money to elicit their views on what was happening on the ground. And that was fantastic. We spoke to 171 people in 3 weeks, which was just phenomenal, as well as healthcare practitioners there. But at the same time, what we were able to ascertain is that they were really, really struggling to get medication, sexual health medication, reproductive medications, etc. So what we did with some of the funds is that we bought the project some motorbikes, and the sex workers who were peers at the project, they basically used the motorbikes to deliver medical supplies to people in the hotspots in the town, in the informal in settlements, and we were able to use some of the project money in relation to impact to do that. So the fact that by May last year we got this NGO a couple of motorbikes to deliver these resources, really important resources, including condoms, to the sex workers was a real highlight for me, and something I'm really glad we could do in the pandemic. But in relation to methodologies, we've used mobile technologies, I think, quite a lot, particularly in lower middle income countries. Obviously, been really important. Lots of other questions coming through. Do stop me, Georgia, because I just thought I was talk.
No, it's so interesting that you can keep talking. Don't worry.
Yes, online, nor is saying online interviews come with their own challenges. They certainly do, and I think there's a real issue around consent and what that means to you as a researcher, what that means to the individual, showing faces, what happens to the recording. I know certainly from the ethics committees that there's been questions around Zoom as a company holding this information, lots of data management things to kind of think through. So yeah, it's been really quite important to think through that. You can't literally just move onto online. Questionnaires. Ruiz said the questionnaires seem to be a very practical method. I know lots of students have used social media to promote their questionnaire and get information like that. Yeah, Helen, I heard Brussels, not brothels. Brussels in Brussels. It's definitely brothels. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? I'd love to hear some people's experiences of overcoming or changing their research. If anyone's got any stories themselves about how they changed. So Laura Fox had to completely change her PhD. Do you want to talk to us about it, Laura?
Yeah, I'm doing a presentation in the first live slot about it, but
Okay.
I had to change completely research questions, methods. I went from quant to qual. It was a...
You went from quant to qual, okay. And how are you feeling about it?
It worked out a lot better, actually. I'm much happier with the overall PhD, but it was quite a traumatic 6 months. Because obviously I'd written pretty much a whole literature review on one topic and then had to scrap it and start again.
So you had to change the whole topic as well, not just the methods.
Yeah.
Wow. So it just means you're super clever. You know more than you were planning to. Well done, you. Well done. So you're doing the fieldwork now? Yeah,
so I've got remote data collection going on at the moment, which has actually worked out much better than if I was to go into schools.
Yeah,
so.
Brilliant, certainly. And I think for PhD students, there is always a question around resources, time, travel, paying participants, all these ethical questions. When you haven't got the resources, you haven't got, it's not a funded project. You might be on a scholarship, you might be self-funding. So I think it's forcing us to think a little bit about the feasibility for students and what's acceptable and kind of changing the kind of classic notion of going out and doing field work, because we are all going to be working in this agile and online world going forward. So we need to make sure the PhD reflects that and just doesn't resort to something we've been doing for 50 years uncritically, I think. So well done, Laura.
And I think we have another question. Hard to keep up with the chat, but I think online ethnography. It's a question for everybody, but would you have any advice for online ethnography? Can that be considered ethnography?
Yeah, the online ethnography. I mean, I think again the questions are very much around consent. And the process is around, being an observer, a covert observer ultimately, and what that means in that space. If you're looking at a forum, or if you're looking at a private room, a private space, I think you have to really think through, You know, is it ethical to do this as a covert observer, or are you going through the process of saying that you're a researcher, being overt about it, and then, you know, what are the implications of that? What data are you going to collect? There's all these questions around if it's a public space, can you use the data without consent? There's lots of things to work through, and there is, you know, lots of literature on this now. I mean, I started writing about online methods in 2005, so I did a bit of an online ethnography as part of my PhD. There is lots of questions to think about, you know, what you're going to do, who you're going to do it with, how you're going to ask consent. So yeah, it's definitely a possibility because life is online. But then I always have these questions around, you know, the difference or the merging of online and offline, and how does that relate, and is online really about the real world? What is the real world? It gets into those very epistemological questions around what is real, what is data, what, you know. So you have to have those discussions, I think, with yourself if you're going to do that online work.
Yeah, very true.
And yeah.
I think Helen and Noor shared a bit of their experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, so Helen's had a research area on her doorstep when she thought she was going to France. Love it.
Yeah, I just, what Noah says about finding and stepping out of your comfort zone and realizing the disappointment. The reason I wanted to do a PhD was to get to France, and then Brexit happened, and then the pandemic, and so Parry has been talking about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that's it's quite humbling, I think.
Yeah, really great. Yeah, really good advice there. France is just for holidays and wine.
Uh-oh.
No, I mean, there's a reason, obviously, if you want to do research there, but, you know, you can still go to France. That's my point. You can have it as leisure.
Good save.
So what's coming up next? I've got no idea of the time. I can't see the time on my screen.
We've got probably another 5-8 minutes. One curiosity I had, if nobody has questions, is what exactly does your training with the police involve? Because you said you were training police and now you can do it even more, but what do you train them for?
Yeah. So generally, so I'm part of a national policing group that advises on policing or assisting police in relation to the sex industry. So I generally train around things like hate crime. So the hate crime is a particular model of policing. There's a whole set of hate crime laws. So I train police around hate crime. I train them around safeguarding. I train them on the different elements of the sex industries. I train them about how to approach victims of crime. I train them about digitally facilitated crimes that they need to be aware of. Yeah, general things like that. So, and I also I run a practitioners forum with people who work with sex workers across the country. These are mainly health practitioners from NGOs and the NHS. And there we share good practice, and we generally would come together 2 or 3 times a year, but now we're doing online. We were doing once a month, we've gone to once every 2 months now, sharing our good practice around working with sex workers. Yeah, so we've done a huge amount.
Okay.
In fact, I've been so busy in the pandemic. In fact, we need to slow down. The idea of having face-to-face meetings, we need to transition to that a little bit, I think, because the diary is just full of Teams meetings. But it's been fantastic. I've been able to I've also got a project on student sex work. In fact, I will plug this. I've got a project on student sex work. So students, obviously, some students are involved in the sex industry. And in December, we had a working group for the last year at Leicester and launched a inclusion policy around student sex work. It's the first policy in the country, and we have an outreach program to universities, and we have free trainings, and we trained 400 people already this year. Again, the beauty of online. introducing them to student sex work as a topic, and then the level 2 training is around dealing with disclosure. So if someone is to disclose that they're in the sex industry, we kind of talk about what the best things to do. So we've mainly been training frontline staff who work in wellbeing, but some academic staff as well, and pastoral staff. So that's been a really fantastic project because it's totally bloomed because of the pandemic. Really, lots more students working in the sex industry online, webcamming, OnlyFans, those kind of indirect services, if you like. So we've kind of really tried to assist and help universities think through what their obligations are around student sex workers. So that's been a great project, and I've got a great team of trainers on that. So
yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Because otherwise I've got one. Okay, I'll do mine. So again, just for curiosity, how did you, because it's such a specific and also quite difficult to reach field to find the content, and how did you start? How did you get the idea? Why did you start with trying to research the sex work and sex industry?
Sex industry. Oh yeah, so it's kind of historic really. I think so I did a degree in sociology and social policy, and then I decided I wanted to be a social worker and went and did that with children, child protection. It was far too hard for me. I went to the States to work for HIV and AIDS charity, went to New York, worked for a HIV and AIDS charity, and met lots of sex workers there who were, you know, not your classical ideas of drug using street sex worker. They were fully functioning escorts. And I came back to the UK and applied to do a PhD and got a scholarship at Oxford, and did that, look at the sex industry in the UK, and it kind of went on from there really. So that was over 20 years ago, and it's kind of been, it was a very under-researched area at the time. It's not now, but at the time we just managed to get in there, and I've done, I don't know, 15, 16 projects now, a very large one on the online sex industries, and now I'm just starting a 4-country study looking at sexual violence and sex work populations. So yeah, it's kind of one of those, you try and move away from your PhD, but sometimes it's slightly impossible. So I'm very lucky being able to work with lots of different organisations and groups to try and change policy and practice. I've just put in the chat.
Again, fascinating.
Student sex work project. Do have a look. Yep. We've trained people all over. I have to say, University of Leeds are a bit unresponsive, but we're trying to get there. I work with an organisation in Leeds called Basis Yorkshire. I don't know if people have heard of Basis. They work specifically with the sex industry, and we've had a recent meeting trying to speak to the head of student services to get Leeds on board. It's a very sensitive subject for people, so we appreciate it's not straightforward.
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Thank you for the link.
Others don't. Oh, sorry. Did somebody else?
Yes. And it will probably be our last question, or our last 2 questions. So if you have any questions, ask them now.
So I just, because I've seen some of your work online, and the working group and everything, and it's been such an eye-opener to me as well, because I didn't know so much about the UK setting as much, because I'm from India. I just wonder, when you work with sensitive topics like this, especially when you're putting it up online as well, how do you then, do you have any sort of strategies on dealing with responses that might not either get what you're doing, or they get it and they don't?
The haters.
Yeah,
I have a lot of that. I have a lot of social media spam and horrible emails about being a paedophile and being a groomer and all this kind of stuff. It goes with the territory thing, I think, really, and obviously over time you start to become slightly immune to it. But your institutions should have its own strategy around dealing with. There's a fine line between abusive messages and abusive feedback, and then engaging intellectual. So we expect to engage with those things, certainly if you've got a social media profile. And in the area of the sex industry, where it is very politicized, and there are groups of feminists all often with quite competing ideas. It's kind of part of the general intellectual debate, but it can move away from that and just be quite abusive and destructive and harmful, not to you but to your participants as well. So we've certainly had a lot of that with the Students Expert Project. But I think just being very clear with your motivations to why you're doing things, and if anything, seeing the hate that sometimes is directed at sex workers just makes me realise that this needs to be done more and more, and we need to think about inclusivity and anti-discriminatory practices, and thinking more broader about how marginalised groups are treated on campus, off campus. As you know, there's a lot around harassment, hate crime on campus, sexual misconduct on campus, all these broader issues which are very sensitive but really are students' experiences. So I think, I take my responsibility seriously to make sure that all students are included, irrespective of their background, their circumstance, etc. But obviously we have a safeguarding role, and that's part of it, but we're certainly not here to make moral judgments about what people do and how they earn money, as long as it's legal. So it goes with the territory, I think, but as junior researchers, I would really suggest that you find out how your institution supports people, particularly if they're getting social media trolls. It's quite, you put out a survey and then suddenly you're getting lots of negative feedback. And I know a lot of my students, or some of my students, who are doing sensitive subjects such as Islamophobia and hate crime. They don't want to have their profiles online. They don't want to have a web page, and it can be quite difficult. So we have to think through that sensitivities, but at the same time, you don't want the negativity to silence you in your research, and that can be a win for them and not for you. So I think it's about how you are supported individually. And often universities have training for postgraduates around media, dealing with feedback and critique. So I'd really suggest people try and look out for that if they're dealing, working with a sensitive subject, which many people are in education.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking, of course, your project is a very specific context, but like you said, Islamophobia or any marginalized group, or talking about even feminism online can attract a lot of negative attention, even. And, it's not just the participants, but also the researcher themselves as well.
100%.
Taking care. So thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, but I think, for me, if you're not making ripples, if you're not, if that doesn't happen, then you're not trying to push for change. You're not trying to change the status quo. So for me, it's always inadvertently a positive, because it means that you're getting at areas that are very tricky, and they need to be changed if there's hatred, directed towards certain groups. So it's kind of seen to be a positive in a way that you just have to keep going, and it's part of the deal, really.
Yeah. Thank you again, Teela. And I think we have finished our time for questions. Thank you for all your inspiring ideas. The presentation was fantastic. So thank you very much for accepting to take part in this conference. And I think we have plenty of love message and
so kind.
No hate in the chat.
Thank you.
And
thanks for inviting me, and I really hope you have a great day.
Thank you, and we'll try to get you for a real conference as soon as we can.
Great, in person. Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. And everybody else, we have 12 minutes for a break, and we'll be back at 11:15 for the first panel, and which will be the pre-recorded one. So I hope you've already seen the presentation, and get ready for your questions. During the breaks, feel free to turn off your cameras and have a proper break. See you in 12.